we're all set.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this DMF webinar. I really want to thank all of you for attending, but as well, I want to thank the DMF staff, Bob Glenn, Aaron Burke, Jared Silva, Justin Wilson, Story Reed, and of course, Julia Kaplan, who's acting as meeting moderator tonight. I'd like to say that we really do miss meeting with you folks in person. It's been over a year since we've been able to attend the MLA annual banquets, where we do meet a lot of commercial fishermen, not just MLA members, but others as well. And this is a different reality. But you know, the upside of this Zoom call is you'll have a very short ride home tonight after the meeting, and we'll try to keep it as informative as possible. The theme of this tonight is to really inform you about all that's going on and take questions and provide answers. And we know from some of the port meetings that we've been having with Justin handing out some rope that you have a lot of questions, and this is a great opportunity to get those questions out there and to kind of talk to you all as a community. At this time, we have 77 attendees. We've had almost twice that sign up, so I'm sure there's more people that are going to be joining us. I want to thank the Mass Lobstermen's Association for giving this topic a lot of ink in their newsletters and also on their website. They've done a great job at getting the word out. But this meeting tonight, I think, will be really especially effective because you'll get to ask questions directly to me and to Bob Glenn and Aaron Burke and Justin about what we're doing specifically. The most substantive part of the meeting is really going to be later in the meeting, where we talk about the contrivances and also our ideas about future buoy line marking schemes. So I really want to make sure we have enough time to get to that. So let's get into this. What I want to do is I have about 6 slides of background that I think are valuable for those folks who don't live and breathe this stuff, like Bob and myself, and of course Beth Cassoni and MLA, that because in a number of instances they've been defendants themselves in some of this litigation. So let's go to the agenda, and I'll just briefly show that. So I've done the introductions, the purpose of the meeting, as I mentioned. I want to get into some past action summaries, like where we are. I want to talk about future actions. I want to talk about our ongoing outreach and where we're getting the funds to do that. And how we're spending those funds. And then Bob is going to talk about the weak contrivances, which is really the most substantive part of this tonight, and then our ideas on future buoy line marking concepts. So go to the next slide, Bob. Okay, so why are we still at this after 25 years? I ask that myself all the time. It was 25 years ago that I got involved with the large whale take reduction team. And we made a lot of progress in terms of population recovery, as you can see in this diagram, going from around 300 all the way up to almost 500. But we've had quite a setback in the last few years, and that's why we're back here. The population as of January 2019, it's a little bit dated now, was just 366 animals. They've been in decline since 2010, coinciding with what's been described as a regime shift in the oceanographic conditions, which results in reduced calving rates and also the changing right whale distribution. Of course, we believe that's added to this unusual mortality event with a whole bunch of mortalities, including many mortalities up in Canada, especially in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, as well as some additional serious injuries, likely resulting in death. And the other thing to remember is a lot of the scientists believe that we're undercounting the carcasses, and just counting carcasses is not a true reflection of the number of whales that are being lost. And then finally, of course, entanglements and vessel strikes are still significant sources of mortality and injury throughout the species range. The confounding issues for you all as Massachusetts lobstermen is that even though a lot of regulations have been placed on your fishery over the last 25 years, we still have entanglements going on somewhere in the range. And because most entanglements are not cited, and then most entanglements are simply recorded as unidentified rope, it's a problem. And it's a problem for lack of identification. And that's why we're still here. We did have an entanglement 5 years ago in Cape Cod Bay. It was a successful disentanglement. It was a non-lethal take, but a take is a take. And that's one of the reasons we got dragged into court. And that's one of the reasons that we're dealing with it as we are. The picture that I show here of the right whale was seen just 2 weeks ago off of Manomet in Plymouth, and it was a whale that had 5/8-inch line coming out of the mouth, and it was very long. It was over 300 feet. So we're very confident that that was not Massachusetts gear, but there wasn't any kind of definitive marking on it. But a rational person will conclude that that wasn't attributable to us for a whole suite of reasons, including the fact that the area is closed. But this sort of paints the picture of the challenges that we have. And I believe that a lot of the regulations that we enacted and that we're going to be proposing in the future will help exonerate the Massachusetts fishery or clarify where some of these entanglements might be happening. And I do want to say that most of the injuries and serious mortalities are in strong diameter ropes, which is not typically fished in the inshore waters. Despite that population decline that I showed earlier, we still see a ton of whales in Cape Cod Bay and in other parts of Mass waters seasonally. Just Sunday, we had a flight with 87 right whales seen in Cape Cod Bay, and the picture I show below shows the locations of those sightings peppered throughout the bay, and that will change seasonally. Sometimes they'll shift to the west, and sometimes they'll shift to the south and the north, but they're feeding on abundant zooplankton. It's a safe place for them. There was, in addition to these 87 whales, not in addition, but as part of the 87, there were also 3 mother-calf pairs, and I believe there's been 17 births this year, which is a real jump from the previous 2 years, where I think one of those years had a 0 count. So there's reason for optimism. So anyway, so that's our reality, is that despite the population declining, we still get a lot of them right here in state waters. So next slide, Bob. So we have 2 challenges. The take reduction team meets. Bob Glenn is my proxy. I started on the team back in '96. Handed it off to Bob about 5 or 6 years ago. He's done a great job for us. That started in 2019 in April, when they sat down and they addressed the so-called unusual mortality event. And I can sum up the plan, which is part of the federal plan that went to proposed rule in our plan as well, which is basically a strategy of weaken the rope, reduce the buoy lines, mark the lines, and close some areas. NIMS is expected to have their rules implemented by May of this year. So they're still in the midst of their rulemaking. We're in frequent contact with them, but that's the initiative that's being done on the federal level. And each state was expected to kind of contribute its conservation measures as part of the overall reduction of reducing risk by 60 to 80%. However, we were required to do a little bit more because of ongoing litigation that was filed by Richard Max Strahan a couple of years ago. And in April of 2020, a federal judge came out with a decision that was not favorable toward us, the defendants. And she pointed out that because of the take that I mentioned 5 years ago that does occur, and the occasional leatherback turtles, that these takes that are taking place in state waters are basically unauthorized takes. And what's meant by that is, under the federal law, the takes that occur in federally permitted gear are covered by what's called an incidental take statement that the federal government puts out about its own fishery. But there is no similar statement for the state waters fishery. And because we have takes, the judge has ordered us to come up with this, or to apply for and receive an incidental take permit. Now, the judge's order had us doing this in 90 days, but it's not that easy, and Bob's going to speak to that in a few slides. But we are very busy working on that application. The regulations that we've enacted and that we will propose on buoy marking or buoy line marking are the foundation of this right whale incidental take permit application. And my last point is that June 7th or 8th, I believe, Bob, there's a multi-day trial, and we'll be on the stand, probably the virtual stand, but there's been a lot of work done by a whole team of lawyers, and we're hoping that the judge will see it our way, allow our fishing to continue, and be satisfied with the progress that we'll be making on this incidental take permit application. So next slide, Bob. Yeah, so the need to reduce risk. I think I'm going to turn this over to Bob at this time because he's he's leading our ITP task force. He's also leading us on the take reduction team. I'm going to hand it over. I'm here to answer any questions on any of the policy issues. And so Bob, why don't you take it from here, and I'll just assist. So thanks.
Sounds
Bob.
good. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. We appreciate this, and we understand that this is a very difficult issue for all of us, especially the fishing industry, to tackle. So picking up where Dan left off, Dan mentioned the order by the federal judge for the Division of Marine Fisheries to apply for and receive an incidental take permit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. So in response to that, DMF formed an incidental take permit task force that consists of myself, Aaron Burke, Jared Silva, Dan McKernan, legal counsel from our department, Bev Vuxen and Tori LeBate, as well as one of the assistant director at Mass Wildlife, who oversees the Natural Heritage Program, who's in charge of the Massachusetts Endangered Species Program. And so she's part of that task force as well. And what we learned early on from doing some research on incidental take permits is that National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service publish a handbook that kind of outlines the process and gives a timeline of what's a reasonable time period for an incidental take permit application. And in that handbook, they outline a process that takes anywhere between 2 and 4 years. And that it's kind of an iterative process where we go back and forth with National Marine Fisheries Service in development of a habitat conservation plan. And throughout this, we're also ordered by the court to continually show progress being made. We have to file monthly progress reports to the court that shows progress that we're working on this take permit application. And part of that, as Dan mentioned, was the foundation of this permit application is some of the rulemaking that we've already started to initiate. And I'll go into more detail with that later. Part of an incidental take permit process is you're getting a take permit under the Endangered Species Act for a take in an otherwise lawful activity. In this case, the lawful activity would be commercial fishing. And so within the permit application, we have to list all commercial fishing activity that has a reasonable likelihood to have an interaction with protected species such as large whales, specifically right whales, and also sea turtles. And our species of most concern for sea turtles in Massachusetts is the leatherback sea turtle. And so right now we're literally working on trying to outline and describe each of these fisheries, and then look at the potential risk that each of them pose to the protected species and to their recovery. And to receive an incidental take permit, we need to mitigate for every single possible source of risk that we can determine. And through that process, we go through a formal NEPA review with National Marine Fisheries Service, whereby they have to make a determination of our fishery of a negligible impact determination is what it's called. And as a result of that we need to, again, not only identify but also account for every possible risk, mitigate for it through management measures, and then demonstrate that we can monitor that effectively. And if we check off all those boxes, we'd have an opportunity to hopefully get our incidental take permit, and we're confident that we can. One of the first major steps is list of fisheries categorization. And so under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, every single fishery in the United States is listed relative to its threat level, and basically they give it a category determination. The category 1 is a fishery where frequent interactions with protected species or with marine mammals occur. The category 3 would be a fishery where there are limited interactions or no interactions with protected species. The Massachusetts lobster fishery is currently part of the U.S. lobster fishery, which includes basically all lobster fishing in state and federal waters. So it includes obviously all the state of Maine. One of the issues is Massachusetts only comprises less than 10% of the entire fishery, with 90% of the fishery occurring in the state of Maine. And so as a result of that, as currently listed as being part of the Northeast lobster fishery, it's impossible for Massachusetts to really move the conservation needle through all of our efforts without being separately listed as our own unique fishery. And that's the process that we've set out to do. We've made a request to National Marine Fisheries Service and have had several productive meetings with them relative to this request. And a lot of the measures that you see and that we've already put into place, as well as measures that we're going to be talking about relative to gear marking, in addition to being designed to protect and conserve right whales and sea turtles, they're also designed to distinguish the Massachusetts lobster fishery from the rest of the United States lobster fishery. And that's, we view as a necessary first step so that we can demonstrate that we can move the conservation needle in this case, and as a result of that, hopefully receive our incidental take permit. And so we are currently in that process and moving along. So as I said, the take process is a long one. The take permit application process is a long one. Right now, we're focusing on some efforts to characterize the gillnet fishery. Part of the judge's order was to also include the gillnet fishery in the take permit application, and so we're in the process of characterizing that, and soon plan to provide National Marine Fisheries Service with a summary of that fishery, and so they can give us an early consultation on what we'll need to do and if and how we would need to incorporate that into a habitat conservation plan. We've also, the rulemaking process that we went out to public hearing on and ultimately approved through the Marine Fisheries Commission, we had asked the National Marine Fisheries Service to vet those regulations through the risk decision tool. And that's a model that National Marine Fisheries Service used as part of the take reduction team process and rulemaking process to essentially assess the effects of different management measures and determine the relative risk reduction that can be achieved by each. And as Dan said at the beginning, through the take reduction team process, the goal put forward by National Marine Fisheries Service was a 60 to 80% reduction. And then so based on the regulations package, which I'll go over in more detail, that has already been approved, that you're aware of, was that achieved an estimated 76.3% risk reduction, which is substantially higher than the 60% required, and hopefully will be sufficient so that it distinguishes us and makes a good case to the service that we are in fact more conservative and that our fishery has a negligible impact on the species. Moving forward, we'll also have to address and account for interactions and takes with sea turtles. That'll be addressed separately in the coming year. Our hope is that those won't be as difficult to achieve. But that remains to be seen. That's something that we'll continue to work on, and at a later date we'll reach out to the fishing industry and start to deal with that. Quickly, just to go over the actions that we've taken so far to achieve this, and what's next. So for this current season, effective March 5th, DMF has extended the trap gear closure through May 15th to the New Hampshire border. We're doing after May 1st, we have reserve the right to manage that in a dynamic fashion, whereby if right whales are not sighted in state waters during that time period, we have the ability between May 1st and May 15th to open the closure early. And we'll continue to monitor that situation, and we're in the process of enhancing surveillance efforts in the Massachusetts Bay and North Shore areas to be poised to be able to monitor the whales and lift the closures early if possible. The other measure, effective May 1st, is a maximum 3/8 inch buoy line diameter for commercial traps. This is largely a rule put into place as an additional means to mark Massachusetts gear and distinguish us as being unique. We're the only jurisdiction who will prohibit rope greater than 3/8 buoy line diameter. And one of the more current trends that we're seeing if you look at the gear that's taken off of right whales from entanglements in the last 10 years, it's changed pretty dramatically from what we saw in the 10 years prior to that. So since 2010, what we've been seeing is a real preponderance of large diameter rope in excess of a 1/2 inch, and often really long pieces of rope. And that comprises in excess of 80% of in those cases where gear is taken off a whale, that large diameter rope is present in 80% of the cases. The opposite, when we look at that data previous to 2010, it used to be the case that the vast majority, in excess of 70% of the rope prior to 2010, was of rope less than a 1/2 inch diameter. And so I think this falls into line with what we have learned about the change in distribution of right whales. They're increasingly using more offshore waters and also waters up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where larger gear types are more prevalent. And this seems to be showing up. And so this is a definitive way for Massachusetts to rule itself out in any case whereby we see a buoy line that comes off a whale in entanglement greater than 3/8 inch diameter. We know that it's not from Massachusetts. Also effective May 1st of this year is the requirement of the 1,700 pound breaking strength buoy line for all commercial traps through the use of fully formed weak and or approved contrivances. In this case, a contrivance, we're also calling them inserts or different names for them, but it'd be some device, which I'll go into more detail in a little bit, that weakens a rope at predetermined areas. And the rule as it's currently written requires that those weak insertions be placed no less than every 60 feet in the top 75% of the buoy line. And so later, if there's some specific questions about that, or we can go through examples, and I could indicate how many buoy lines would be necessary. Additional stuff that DMF is working on is we're currently, we received a fairly large grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to kind of scope out the technological, operational, and financial feasibility of ropeless fishing. What we're doing this effort, we've contracted a Noah Oppenheim, who is a researcher out of Maine, who has an extensive experience with fixed gear fisheries as well as protected species from previous work he's done out in California with the Dungeness crab fishery. And he is interviewing a wide range of both fishing industry members, state and federal regulators, gear technologists and developers, as well as NGOs and conservation organizations. And essentially, our job here is to provide, the deliverables are to provide the grantor, which is in this case National Marine Fisheries Service, with some research priorities moving forward so they can determine how best to spend money to deal with these issues. And so there's more details to come on that later. And certainly as that research moves along, we're happy to host another webinar like this and give more detail about that. But for tonight, the focus is really going to be focus on looking at weak contrivances and weak rope. And so we'll talk more about that. What's next? One of the most important things is going to be changing our gear marking requirements. We're going to be proposing new gear marking requirements, both to help make mast gear as uniquely identifiable, and especially to help differentiate it from both other states, but also gear set in federal waters. And this is a kind of a key aspect of our incidental take permit, because moving forward, any entanglements that occur, we have to be careful that we don't mistakenly have to accept responsibility for gear that was not deployed by Massachusetts. And so a unique gear marking is going to be a necessary part of that. And then next, we'll move on to the next slide. So this is just a summary of those actions. Oh, I did want to mention on that gear marking, our plan is to go into rule making this year and try to get those regulations codified and in the books by June or July of 2021. However, they would not be effective. The new gear marking rules would not be required or effective until February 1st of 2022. So there's no need to rush and try to gear mark for this coming fishing year. This will be something that we're going to work on, get it into place, and you'll have until next year to get it in. And so this is just here a table that shows the action date when DMF took action, and then the effective date when it's goes into place. And as I said, March 5th is when the seasonal dynamic closure for the entire state waters from Chatham north went into place. Max buoy line and contrivances are effective May 1st of this year. Other actions of note is the federal biological opinion. That's due to be a draft biological opinion was put out in the late of, or either early, I believe it was late 2020 or early 2021. The exact date escapes me now, but in this winter it came out with a proposed biological opinion, and NMFS is on schedule and ordered in a separate litigation case to have that out and published, I believe, and this should say May 31st of 2021 is my understanding. That's coming out. And then also NMFS has several proposed rules that are part of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team. Those are, for Massachusetts, are no different than what we've already put in place, so we're a little bit ahead of the game. The one difference is that they will be putting their gear marking requirements into place, and they're also in the process of scoping and considering how to allow ropeless fishing in closed areas, and that'll hopefully be part of the rulemaking that'll be finalized later in the summer. Just so everyone's aware, this is a picture or a map of the closed area. The pink area is the traditional Mass Bay restricted area, and the bright red area is the newly added addition of Massachusetts Bay in the North Shore up to the New Hampshire border that was added this year. This is a whale sightings map. The reason I put this in was there's a lot of questions about whether or not we needed to extend the closure north and throughout Mass Bay and up to the North Shore because of whether or not there were actually whales present up there. And while certainly the whales are not as dense as they are down in Cape Cod Bay during that time period, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen an increasing trend, especially late in the season, in April and then in May, of whales being up and around Mass Bay and off of Cape Ann. And that's, given that risk, it's something that we felt we really needed to address because of our need to, for the incidental take permit to be able to identify and mitigate for all potential sources of significant risk. And this is certainly one of them. What's the status of ropeless fishing? Massachusetts in recent years has provided letters of authorization for several fishermen working with National Marine Fisheries Service to test kind of the pop-up buoy mechanisms, specifically during the open fishing season. NIMS gear technologists are working on this effort, doing a lot of work on testing the efficacy of the callback buoy systems, which seem to work very well. One of the other aspects that still needs sufficient work is kind of the marking and location system and the issues related to how all gear types, including mobile gear and other fixed gear, can see this unbuoyed gear. And so research on that continues to go on. And as I said, DMF is currently researching this in a large scale grant. That results will come out at the end of this year. And then finally, NIMS proposed rule, if enacted, actually transforms closures to pots and traps to closures of persistent buoy lines. So they're entertaining changing that to open the door to allow ropeless fishing in enclosed areas. However, our understanding is that they still plan to use their exempted fisheries permit process to permit that activity, and that's likely to be required. Moving forward, DMF expects NIMS to use EFPs to be used as primary as a means to develop technologies and not simply to just allow the removal of buoy lines and to allow grappling of gear. All right, so now I would like to get into kind of the meat of what I think some of the most important discussions are tonight, and to talk a little bit about gear marking. So in the NOAA's lobster gear marking proposal that came out in the proposed rules, National Marine Fisheries Service suggested that the mast color would be red, and that for state waters fishermen, there would be 1 3-foot mark within the top 12 feet of buoy line, followed by 2 1-foot red marks in the bottom half. And you see in the little diagram on the right, the state waters marks that look like that. And then for federal waters, what they proposed was just adding an additional 6-inch green mark. And I think the logic behind what that was for those boats who are dual permitted and seasonally fish in both state and federal waters, to make the mark fairly simple so that it was easy for fishermen to kind of add on the fly when they're moving, add or take off on the fly when they're moving gear. And that, that was the primary idea behind it. Unfortunately, the problem is that in most entanglement cases that we see where gear is retrieved or off a whale, most often the surface system, including the buoy and the top several feet of rope, are not retained. And so the result of that is a gear marking scheme where if you remove that 1 6-inch green mark, it looks just like the state waters gear marking scheme. And so it's our opinion, and we provided comment to the service about this, was that the proposed gear marking scheme for federal waters wasn't sufficient to adequately distinguish state waters gear fished in Massachusetts versus that of Massachusetts boats fishing in federal waters. And so we've asked, we've mentioned this to NIMS. We've asked them to reconsider and change it. And it's at the end of the day, given the current status of right whales pending litigation, as well as the NIMS biological opinion in the draft environmental impact statement, which clearly states that the incidental take statement only covers fishing activities in federal waters, and each state would be responsible for their own incidental take permit. For those reasons, we feel it's absolutely critical to uniquely identify Massachusetts fishing gear. And so because of that, we have been working on some additional gear marking proposals that we're likely to move forward on in the coming weeks. And here's what we're proposing. And so we got some good feedback too from some folks at MLA. Beth Cassoni had a good point, and this relates to the size of the marks. And so what we see here is on the left is what's proposed under the NIMS rulemaking, and to the right is what DMF is proposing. We think for federal waters under so that would be the third one from the left, DMF proposal for EEZ. We're considering that requiring Massachusetts-based boats who fish in the EEZ to put a green mark next to every red mark to clearly indicate that it's federal waters. Now, we understand that this is a lot of extra work and difficulty for our fishermen, especially those who go back and forth across that. But unfortunately, we just don't see a way around it, and ultimately can't risk the potential for us getting blamed for an entanglement that we didn't cause. And then on the far right is what we're proposing for state waters. And so it's a much higher frequency of marks. That's to help distinguish us from all the other states, which is one of the things that we have been asked to do by National Marine Fisheries Service. If to get our list of fisheries distinction, we need to uniquely mark our gear. And so to do that, we're proposing both changing the number of marks as well as the size of the marks. And so all the states right now are using 12-inch marks. We're thinking of proposing 24-inch or 2-foot marks instead of 1-foot marks to make those unique, and then making the frequency greater. The other thing is we're trying to take advantage of the weak contrivance rules, which require you to put a weak contrivance in every 60 feet of the top 75% of the buoy line. And so with that, if you're using a short section of the red weak rope as a weak contrivance, in this case, it would also count as one of your marks in the string. And so we're trying to take advantage of that as well. And so how the rule would be worded would be something on the order of one red mark within 12 feet of the buoy line, followed by at least 4 red marks measuring at least 1 foot throughout the remainder of the buoy line, with no more than 60 feet between any mark. And so this is a little complicated at first, but it's actually fairly simple. So it's just basically saying that no buoy line can have less than 4 or 5, and no buoy line can have a length of rope greater than 60 feet without a mark. And if it checks off both of those boxes, it would be compliant. The objectives of doing this is to better differentiate between gear set in state waters versus the EEZ. It enhances our ITP application as Mass gets state waters gear will be uniquely marked in a manner that is more conservative than is required in other jurisdictions. And it also utilizes weak contrivances as a means of complying with gear. So that's what we're looking at and likely to go to rulemaking. I can certainly later at the end of this presentation, we can take questions and comments about that too. And then finally, and I appreciate your patience, there's a lot of material, weak rope and contrivances. And so this rule, as I mentioned earlier, was put into place effective May 1 of this year. The goal that we took moving into this was to develop weak contrivances that are inexpensive, easy to implement, and break at or below 1,700 pounds. And the criteria that we set was that all contrivances must be identifiable, repeatable, and enforceable. And that's something that National Marine Fisheries Service is advising all jurisdictions that's going to be a criteria that they put into their rules. And so we're out ahead of that of their schedule, but so we're taking that as part of our rulemaking. And so we worked with commercial fishermen throughout the state to develop 8 different contrivances that fishermen can use to comply with the new regulations. It was actually really good. We got a bunch of text, emails, phone calls from different fishermen from the Outer Cape, from Gloucester, from Cape Cod Bay, from Buzzards Bay, like all over, guys coming up with different ideas for us to develop and have tested. And what was good is a lot of the options from different ports were similar. Guys had similar ideas. And so we worked with them to develop 10 samples of each option. And then we shipped those up to Maine to the rope breaking machine to be tested. And so far, the results that have come back have been very encouraging. The results show that most of the options that we tested broke at or below the required 1,700 pounds. All these options were then, the data was shared with National Marine Fisheries Service, And NIMS has indicated that our contrivances are consistent with the criteria for approval that they are creating right now. And so while they can't use the approved word at this point because their rules are not finalized, that was a strong statement by them, and we appreciate it, saying that, what we've done so far is on the right track. And we continue to work with NIMS as well as Maine DMR, New Hampshire Fish and Game, and Rhode Island DM to develop workable options, and certainly are open to additional options. And I'm going to go over what we have approved so far. So our weak rope options use 3 different materials. 2 are weak rope, and the other option is using a Nova braid sleeve. And so the 2 weak ropes, the first is the fully formed red weak rope, which is on the left, made by Rocky Mount Cordage Company. This has consistently been tested and shown to break less than 1,700 pounds, usually around, right around mid, like 1650 or close to 17, the raw rope. And also the Rocky Mountain Cordage Company's fully formed 17 pounds bonded calling it candy cane rope. That's a picture on the right. That's the latest. That's a version 2.0. The first version that they sent was coming apart too easy and unwinding. So they've added a bonding agent. It makes it pretty stiff, but it's workable for the most part. And it's my understanding that National Marine Fisheries Service is also working with some other rope manufacturers, including one in India who's currently has shipped an additional weak rope option. We don't have it in hand yet. It hasn't been tested, but there are additional options coming. Here are the test results. And you can see this is both the mean and the median breaking strength. And what I thought it was important to show here is a couple of things. Is while they all passed the conservation test of 1,700 pounds, with the exception of one, which was using a butt splice on the bonded candy cane rope, was consistently breaking over 1,800 pounds. So we're not going to approve that option at this time, where it needs further development and testing. But all the other options did break at or below 1,700 pounds or within that tolerance. What's good about it, though, is it, while they broke at less than 17, they weren't super weak. We didn't have any options that we tested that were breaking at like 1,000 or less, or lower breaking strengths that makes them not really workable for commercial fishing operation. And so this is, these are the data for those options. And then here is some pictures of describing them. So the one on the far left is a lazy splice using 4 tucks with the red rope. That passed. We tested it with 3 tucks of the red rope. That also passed. Then a idle loop splice where the rope is tucked over. That passed. And then on the far right, a butt splice with the red rope. So these are the 4 options that are currently approved, with using pieces, a 3-foot section of the red, minimum of a 3-foot piece of the red rope, intertwined into your normal buoy line, would be approved in this case. And these are the different options. For candy cane rope, that's a little bit different. So the 4-tuck lazy splice with bonded candy cane was approved. The Eye Splice, like is pictured here on the right with the candy cane rope, was approved. The 3-tuck lazy splice with bonded candy cane rope was not tested. And the reason for that is the rope has a pretty hard lay. It's pretty hard to work with. If fishermen are really interested in the 3-tuck, I think we can develop that and test it. But the 4-tuck works very well and has been approved. And then there's the one option, the butt splice, which I showed here up in this figure, the one highlighted in yellow, which we did not approve because it's just consistently breaking too high. And so that's not approved at this time. Additional contrivances are those that use the Nova braid, or also called the South Shore sleeve. This photo here, just a little backstory first, is that last year through our ventless trap survey, DMF employed these on virtually all of our buoy lines from our ventless trap survey. In addition to that, there's several South Shore fishermen who have been using these for up to 5 years. And if installed correctly, they work very well, and their breaking strength is on par with the weak rope options. And so The picture on the left is a kind of a close-up of how the ends are tucked in, and then the picture in the middle is just a regular raw South Shore sleeve. And then the option on the far right was an option that I believe a fisherman out of Plymouth sent to us, and he wanted to attach the sleeve in a different way. And so what he asked is if you could attach the two pieces with the sleeve, hog ring the ends, and then cover them with heat shrink tubing. And so we had that tested as well, just to make sure that adding the heat shrink tubing and didn't enhance the breaking strength. And as you can see from the test results here, the one at the bottom, option 8 South Shore sleeve, that had a mean breaking strength of 1650, which is right on par with all the other options tested. So those options are approved as well. And so in total, those are the options that we have. We have 8 different contrivance configurations, and also the ability to fish fully formed rope. So we understand that this changeover is difficult for folks, and so we're doing our best to try to help out. DMF, we received funds through an ASMFC grant, and also directly from Governor Baker, who set aside $200,000 for us to purchase rope and South Shore sleeves. To date, we've purchased 2,500 coils of weak rope and 7,000 South Shore sleeves. And our goal is to provide every mass pot trap fisherman with up to 2 coils of weak rope and up to 20 sleeves, and possibly more sleeves, depending on how supplies last, and we may be able to purchase some additional if there's interest. Based on feedback we've gotten from a few fishermen who kind of work through the math with their gear, we anticipate that this will give enough fishermen enough material to rig all of their buoy lines. And so it's our hope that that's the case. We're hosting several rope distribution events throughout the state. Our new staff member, Justin Wilson, was hired specifically to help the industry with this rollout. Justin's been working to set up these week rope distribution events throughout the state. The first round occurred from March 15th through March 19th, and we did events at New Bedford, Sandwich, Gloucester, Scituate, and Chatham, and we've just already distributed over 500 coils of rope. Justin is currently working on setting up additional. I know a lot of guys have reached out via our email, Conservation Solutions. We will answer your email. If you emailed us and we didn't get back to you right away last week, it was because we're out at these distribution events, or our supply of rope was currently low. We just last Friday got another 500 coils of rope delivered, and Justin's in the process of setting up a second round of distribution events. This time we'll hit. It says Gloucester. We may do another North Shore port other than Gloucester. That's to be determined, but we're working on that. We're going to try to hit Cardinal Madeiras Dock in Boston, some spot in Plymouth, another event at Martha's Vineyard, a bigger event in Martha's Vineyard, and then also try to hit Provincetown. And then we'll do third and or fourth rounds if necessary. And so we're trying to move these out as fast as possible, get these rope and examples of these contrivances into the hands of guys, and help with any questions that they have about rigging. And so for more information about this, you can go. We created a DMF buoy line trap gear modification webpage. The link is here. This presentation will be posted on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to get that. Also, if you're interested in signing up for a rope distribution event, you can contact us at conservationsolutions@mass.gov. And as I said, we will get back to you, and we will make sure we get your name, set your rope aside, and then tell you which event would be the most appropriate for you to go to, depending on where you're at. If you have additional ideas for weak contrivances, or you have another thing you'd like to see tested, you can contact Justin Wilson, and his email address is posted here. I want to remind everybody that contrivances, though, need to be safe. They need to be identifiable, repeatable, and enforceable. And if they meet these criteria, we'll be happy to work with you and have them tested. Just so folks are aware, things that are not identifiable or repeatable and that have been tested and do not show promise at this point are options like taking standard fishing 3/8 rope and just cutting one strand. The problem with that is that all 3/8 rope isn't created equal. Some start at 2,500 breaking strength. Most are around 3,000 to 4,000, and there's even some that break in excess of 5,000 pounds. And so, just cutting a strand and a piece of rope doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to break below the necessary strength. And so, that's not really an option that we're considering at this time. So, I think with that, I'll hand it back to Dan, and Dan can go from there.
Thanks, Bob. Great job. And for all the fishermen, you can hear in Bob's voice how hard we're working on this. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the industry at these events that Bob had mentioned, and with Justin, out on the road. One thing I did want to clarify in Bob's presentation is that when Bob talks about the Massachusetts proposed regulations having a net risk reduction of more than 70%, I just want everybody to know that the National Marine Fisheries Service credited us for the mass restricted area closure that was enacted in 2015. So they didn't take another bite out of us, with this round of rulemaking. And I want to credit Bob for making some very passionate arguments at why that was an appropriate thing to do. So Bob, I think it would be best to stick with these contrivances issues and the gear marking. And then if there's more time and people have sort of general questions about sort of the ITP process and why do we even need to save right whales, we can kind of get that later. I just think it's so critical to let the fishermen ask questions and talk to you about the contrivances and gear marking first. What do you think of that?
I agree. I think that makes the most sense.
Okay, so folks, the thing to do is to raise your hand. I can already see there's two hands, Eric Lorenzen and Garrett Lepardo, and Julia is going to notify you one at a time and we'll unmute you. So Julia, take over the hosting duties.
Sure. So at this time, if you have questions about the contrivances, there's a raise hand feature, should be at the bottom of your screen, and a toolbar. You can press that. I'm going to start with John Redmond because he had a question at the beginning. John, you can unmute yourself.
All right, there I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I just got a couple of simple questions. I rarely fish more than 100 feet of line. So do I start at the bitter end and count out 60 feet and put one of the contrivances in there and I'm good, right?
You're muted, Bob.
Hello?
Sorry, thanks. I was muted. Right, so I'll go through that example. So in a 100-foot line, the top 75% of that would be 75 feet. And so you have to have one contrivance every 60 feet. So you would be
starting from the bitter end? Starting from the top, right?
Starting from the top. And then, so what you can do, it only has to have one contrivance, and it can be anywhere in that top 75% in that particular case. You don't have to start from the bitter end and measure down, or from the bottom measuring up, as long as you don't have a length of line greater than 60 feet that has without a weak contrivance. You're all set.
Okay, how many markings do I need on that? Four red markings?
So, well, right, that's to be determined. We don't have any officially approved gear marking regulations yet. Right now, what we're proposing, there's two options we're looking at. It's either a total of, let me go back.
Bob, the gear marking is for next year.
Okay, I'll forget about that then. All right,
Yeah, okay.
No gear.
Yep.
I mean, I don't, if I have to go to 160 feet, which I really do, that I'd need 2 weak links, right? Because 120 feet is 75%. That's 260s.
That's correct.
So all I need is 1, and I can count down 60 feet from the end and put 1 in there, and I'm good, right?
Correct.
All right, that's all I need to know. I can tie a knot. I can splice, and you know what I mean. I'll try the South Shores first. You know, so all I need to know is where to put it. That's my question. I'm good to go.
John, thank you for your cooperation and your patience. We know this is a pain, and so thank you.
Well, it's better than buoyless. You know what I mean?
Okay.
All right, next we have Eric Lorentzen. Eric, you can unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
My question's regarding buoyless fishing, so we can wait. You can skip over me and stay with the contrivances.
Okay. Next we have Garrett Lepardo. Garrett, you can unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
What's the longest line for one of those contrivances?
The longest line from one of those contrivances. Now, you have to do some quick math here. It would be, so yeah, let me, I don't want to shoot off the cuff. Just give me a couple of minutes, and why don't we go to the next question, and I'll answer that in a minute.
I got another one for you.
Sure.
So like, if Esther Pro 5/16 breaks at like over 2,000, and after a season it breaks under 1,700, this red rope and this candy cane rope after a season is pretty much going to be throwaway rope. I mean, anybody that fishes any sort of tide. So is that something that was accounted for?
Yeah, I mean, it's understand that certainly rope that normally starts out at 3,800 pounds is going to last a lot longer than rope that starts out at 17. You know, it's certainly it's a consideration, but at the end of the day, we have to authorize rope that starts at 1,700 pound based on research that's been done about serious injury and mortality on whales. And so to comply with both the federal measure that's coming forward, as of next year, it won't be just Massachusetts who has to fish 1,700 pounds. It's going to be the entire fishery. And so, understanding that it's certainly not ideal for normal fishing operations, it's a necessary step, unfortunately.
Hey, Bob, can I ask Garrett why tide would weaken rope?
The tide doesn't weaken the rope, just the rope being in the water. I mean,
you had said that because of the tides, the rope was going to be weakened.
Well, when you're in a heavy tide, you got to have a more powerful hauler. You got to have a heavier trap.
Oh, okay. Right, I get it. Yep.
So, another question, which I'm sure a bunch of guys from my area are wondering right now, in the gear marking proposal, for a while now, we've been distinguishing trawls and single traps. Where was the distinguishing in the proposal between trawls and single traps?
Well, there's no difference in the surface system. The surface systems would be the same. Good question. The single trap gear buoy line marking scheme that we came up with 6 years ago will be done away with, right, Bob?
Correct.
Yeah. So for the last 6 years, we got permission through the take reduction team to allow you to continue to fish singles with a special singles marking scheme. So that'll be taken away.
And so that, go ahead.
You can still
trawls and single traps will all be marked the same.
Correct.
Yeah, that experiment came to an end.
What did that experiment show?
Well, in other words, what we asked for was permission to go 5 years to see if this kind of line was going to come up on the backs of whales to determine if it caused a problem that was in need of solving. And I think for the most part, that answer was no. So we can move on and now address kind of the more global issue. So that was a temporary gear marking scheme in order for us to go into like a 5-year trial period to get singles allowed. And as you know, we entertained doing away with singles for vessels 29 feet and larger, and we pulled that back in front with our commission because we just thought it wasn't going to accomplish the goal.
Oh yeah, agreed.
So to answer your question about the maximum length of rope that you could use with only one contrivance, the answer is 159 feet, and I'll go through the math. So if you take a 160-foot buoy line, the top 75% of that equals 120 feet. At 120 feet, to get 60, you can't have greater than 60-foot length without a buoy line. I mean, without a contrivance. And so 120 feet would require 2. So therefore, 1 foot less than that you would be able to set it up in such a way that you wouldn't have more than 60 feet without a contrivance.
So 119, Bob?
159.
Okay.
159 is the maximum length of a total buoy line.
Got it.
That's really what a lot of us are most worried about, because where we fishing amongst all the trawls and we start getting hung down on all the trawls, I mean, we're going to have to cut our buoy lines back from 180s that we typically fish to keep our gear up in the tide, to not be parting our gear off left and right, or hoping that whoever comes by on the trawl we're hung on untangles it.
Yeah, the other option that folks are considering for deeper fishing is putting a longer piece of ground line between the first and the second trap, so that you're not suspending more than one trap in the water column when you're hauling up. And then once you get to the ground line, that can be any strength. So one of the considerations would be lengthening that first trap on the ground line just to make it put less strain on the buoy line while it's coming up.
Well, I don't really care at all about the trawls. I'm just worried about my 400 single traps that me and my wife have. Because when I set my single traps where all the trawls are, you get pinned down a lot. And I asked about the maximum buoy line because I'm trying to avoid putting a second contrivance in the rope, because where I get in around the trawls, I'm going to lose a lot of gear getting hung down and trying to get my traps up. A lot of guys are wondering that same question. So
okay, thank you. All right, Julia, who's next?
Okay, next we have John Todd. Okay, hang on. I had to promote him to a panelist. He's on an older version of Zoom. John, you can unmute yourself.
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I got a couple of questions. So one of them, when Bob was talking about the candy cane rope or the sleeves, with the gear marking and the possibility of using the red marking, the red breaking rope as your red marks in your line when you're doing the gear marking in the future when you're changing the rules with that. Would the candy cane rope or the sleeves also count in that? Or because they're obviously the candy cane's not all red and the sleeves are orange, would you still consider that as part of your marking?
Yeah, so in the case of the candy cane rope, a 3-foot section of that inserted in would count because it would have the equivalent of, it'd be similar to putting a red tracer in your line, right?
Right, right.
And then similarly for the South Shore sleeve, if you look at the picture, the standard orange South Shore sleeve has a red tracer in it. So those two already are compliant with the Massachusetts color red.
Okay, okay, that's good. And then the other thing that in that picture you have on the right with the lobsterman had suggested using the heat shrink over the sleeve, and you said that was tested, and that design right there is approved.
That design is approved. It
Okay.
doesn't, just so everyone's aware, it doesn't change the braking strength. It's
Okay.
the braking strength between the two are basically exactly the same.
Okay.
It just, I think folks are interested in that it may provide some additional chafing or just reinforcement to the
Right,
connection.
that's what I had heard, that there was problems with the sleeves getting caught in the knives as they wore and chafed. So that's good to know that was approved.
Yep.
The other question I have is, now I'm fishing from anywhere, from 10 feet in early season, some places, upwards of 225 feet late fall into the early winter. So my buoy lines, my standard buoy line, because I have separate buoy lines from my ground line, and I fish 10 pot trawls. So my standard buoy lines are 12 fathom. So we'll just say 70 feet, because you're losing a foot on each end when you're doing your connections to the buoy and the trawl.
Yep.
So so on a 70-foot buoy line, I know this is a big question for a lot of guys, and you kind of already answered a little bit with the first gentleman, but as far as placement of the red marks, because as I go out deeper, I have 40-foot extensions. So typically at the most I'm going to have is my buoy line in the middle with two sink extensions on the top and 2 float extensions down the bottom. So I'm just trying to work out the math of the placement so that everything's compliant. So the way I see it is, if I were to put my red mark in my standard buoy line 40 feet down, it would be 30 feet up. So it would be in the top 3/4 of the buoy line, which I believe would be 52 feet. So that would be in compliance there, and it's not more than 60 feet. And if I'm adding on extensions on top, and I have 2 of them, if I had a top one with no braking sleeve, the second one, if I put it in the middle of it at 20 feet, then that makes 60 feet down to the first breakaway. And then from that breakaway down to the one I have 40 feet down on my buoy line would be 60 feet. So that's compliant. And then from that one down to my next one in my first float extension on the bottom would actually be 50 feet. So less is okay, right? As long as it's not more than 50, more than 60.
That's correct. So,
all right. So that would be,
yeah, you could put more marks than you just can't have. So the rule probably reads something like no fewer than 4 or 5 marks, and no length of rope greater than 60 feet without. And as long as it complies with that, the exact placement is less important.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bob. I'm not talking about marks. I'm talking about the weak links. Did I say marks? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you said marks, but that's okay. The marking rule is just, it has to be, no more than no length of buoy line greater than 60 feet without a weak insertion.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to make sure I'm compliant with that.
Yep.
The only other question I have regarding the line is, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, when we're fishing shallow water in the early part of the season, and you're in 15, 20 feet of water sometimes, and you have a 70-foot buoy line, what do you do with the extra line? You reef it up on the top.
Yep. So in that case, as long as the reefed up line hanging near the top has the appropriate marks on it, you would be okay. So in other words, so in the case of a whale happens to swim into shallow water and gets caught in that, after they break free, they're going to be trailing that line. So it's just critical that reefed up line complies.
Yeah, because I know that it's been brought up in the past as far as marking. If you've got it reefed up, is it technically the length of the line from the buoy to the trap, regardless of whether there's a reef or not, and where the marks go? But I don't think that's ever really. I don't think it's become an issue. But now, does it become an issue with if you had that breakaway inside that reef? Which I won't, because obviously if I'm putting it 40 feet down, it should be good. But
yeah, so so any line that's reefed up at the top would have to comply both with the weak insertion and the marking rule.
Right. But say like we'll just say for instance, example, if I had the 70-foot buoy line and I have my weak link, say I put it 20 feet down instead from the top, and you reefed up 30 feet of line. Now that weak link is inside the line. Yep. By the rule, it's still, it's in the right spot in the line.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right.
Now it's in the reef, so technically it's ineffective because it's in the reef.
Yeah. So
the rule doesn't speak to that. So I don't want to see anybody get in trouble by the EPOs for doing that because, it hasn't been addressed. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment and something that we'll likely need to address. We need to make sure that for the purposes of the weak contrivance that it's actually there's a weak link in the floating, the unreefed up portion of the buoy line. So that's something we'll have to address.
Okay. And that's all the questions I have for that section. When we get the other stuff later, I have a couple. So thank you.
Sure. All right. Thanks.
All right. Next we have John Simons. John, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. You actually got my name right.
That's good.
All right. So my question is on the South Shore sleeves. I have a few of them that I've rigged up with 1 fathom lines with an eye splice on either end. And my thought was, like, as John Todd was talking about, when I'm in shallow water, I'm going to need that in a different spot than where I need it in deep water. And my thought was, with an eye splice on either end, I can just tie it in wherever I need it and move it up and down the buoy line. And I just want to make sure that's legal.
Yeah, so I had a good discussion today with NIMS and some of their gear folks and other gear folks from other states who are working on this issue. And one thing that we came to consensus on is that the critical feature of one of these contrivance is the base material, not necessarily how it's connected. So physics dictates that if the contrivance itself, in this case, the sleeve breaks at 1,700 pounds or less, that's it. No matter which way you connect it to a heavier rope, it can't break at a tensile strength stronger than its base. So in other words, it's always going to be no matter how you connect it, it's going to be less than its starting point. And so to answer your question, yes, it would be approved. It doesn't really particularly matter in this case if you're using a sleeve, how you attach it. It's a matter of putting it in a manner that lasts for your own sake, for longevity, so that it doesn't, wear out quickly.
Okay, so just to clarify, I can tie a double becket to the 2 eye splices 6 feet above and below the South Shore sleeve, and that will be legal.
Well, I don't know what a double becket is, but you know what it would be. I think what would be my sense is yes, but why don't you take a picture of that and email it to me and I'll follow up with you.
Okay, yeah. So the reason I'm asking that question is I'm confused. If what you're saying about the sleeve is correct, why does it matter how we tie the red rope in? Like you've got, in my mind, if red rope breaks at 1,700 pounds and you tie it in however the hell you want and put it in the rope machine, the red rope should still break at 1,700 pounds. I don't understand why there's such a, you gotta, why it matters whether you're splicing it or what really confused me is that eye splice, and then they do like this there's an eye splice in the red rope, and then they wrap the rope around it and pass it through 3 or 4 times. Why does that matter? Why can't you just tie a double becket or a square knot or whatever? Why does that change how the red rope breaks?
Good question. It doesn't change how it breaks, but it adds a knot to the profile. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is avoid knots to the extent possible, because knots during an entanglement tend to get caught in whale's baleen. It acts kind of like a jam cleat. And so if you look at all the options that we're we've approved here, they're all fairly streamlined. You don't see any large overhand knots. And that was purposeful to try to keep the profile of these inserts as streamlined as possible.
Okay, so does that cause a problem with my, I have a lazy eye splice similar to what that option number 3 is. And then I would tie, so if you know what a bowline looks like, it's like a bowline with an extra tuck through. And it's still pretty low profile. It's not like it's a fisherman's knot or a overhand knot. Like I said, I just spent all this money on these sleeves. I don't want to rig them all up and then find out I can't use them.
No, understood. And so, like I said, if you take a picture of how you're going to rig it up or what you're proposing, and I'll pass it around to the gear folks at NIMS and see what they say. And breaking strength wise, I'm not concerned about it. So, and if they give it the all clear, it's something we can add to the approved list. It shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yep.
Okay, next we have Jay and Susan Mashad. Jay and Susan, you can unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. I got a couple of questions. One, the weak links that we've been using, the plastic weak links, they are no longer to be used. We should discard them or keep them. What should we do there?
So great question, Jay. So currently there is in the National Fisheries Service proposed rules. I believe their preferred alternative is to remove the requirement to use those any longer. Those are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, we did not address that in our rules yet because they're still currently part of the federal requirement, and we can't do that. We can't remove them until National Fisheries Service does. So for this year, my understanding is you still need to have them, but moving forward, there's a good chance that you will not.
Okay. When the red rope is readily available and we can start buying it direct, if we run the red weak rope from the buoy to the first trap and use it in the entire column, does that satisfy the requirement? And if it does, how do we mark it?
Excellent question again. So yes, it satisfies the weak contrivance or rope requirement because a fully formed red weak rope is approved. We're working on the gear marking rules right now. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense to mark red rope with red twine or red paint or whatever. So likely for Massachusetts, for those fishing red rope, will likely propose an alternate color like white.
Okay.
For contrast.
Thank you.
One more question.
One more thing. I really, from the bottom of my heart, want to congratulate you, the division, for all the hard work you've done, being under the gun with the court systems and having to come up with something that hopefully will satisfy them. You've done a remarkable job.
What's happening with the people that just fish? Pleasure people.
Thanks, Jay, and we appreciate all the cooperation we've gotten from the industry.
Dan, I think I heard Sue ask a question about what's happening to the recreational fishing, if I understand correctly, as well.
We have a lot of recreational fishermen in our area.
Yep.
Lots and lots of them. So if they just use a line and doesn't have a weak link in it or anything, or any of the rules, they've already have that they don't have to have a V. They can take a smaller V. They can take a V notch if it's not large. So are they exempt from this other?
They are not exempt from all the rules. So I can quickly go over what the recreational fishery. So we did several things. First, we have a pot trap or a seasonal haul out period or closure for the recreational fishery. And that period goes from November 15th through May 15th. So where all their gear has to be removed from the water, so they can't leave it out all year long any longer. We're also requiring all recreational permit holders to fish no greater than 5/16 inch rope. We did not go down the path of requiring contrivances with them, mainly because we just didn't think we could, given that most of them are very inexperienced, that we could get really good compliance with them and have the ability to really figure out all the various options of tying different splices and knots. So with the 5/16 inch rope, we know that starts at a much lower breaking strength, and it's also a smaller amount of buoy lines than in the commercial. So we have taken some steps there. Dan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's a misnomer that every recreational fisherman fishes 10 traps and there's something like 8,000 of them, therefore they fish 80,000 traps. Our records show that the average is much less than that, and many of them don't fish at all, they scuba dive. So I think our latest estimate on the number of vertical buoy lines attributable to the recreational sector was around 20,000. So it's fairly small. And like Bob said, it's in shallow water in most all circumstances. And furthermore, we put a closure on them. So we hope that those rules contribute to sufficient risk reduction.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Oh, I did want to mention one other thing on the previous question about attaching a sleeve. One important point to consider is anytime you add a knot to a rope, it's going to reduce the breaking strength. And so for example, a fisherman's knot tying that in can reduce the breaking strength by as much as 40%. And so if you're starting with a weak rope, you might not, attaching it using some certain types of knots may reduce it lower than what you had anticipated. Whereas the type of splices that we used here, in addition to being streamlined, are also connections that are fairly efficient and that they tend not to dramatically reduce the strength of the connection. Okay, Julia.
Okay. Next we have Lobster Guy. Lobster Guy, you can unmute yourself.
A couple questions on that picture that's shown right now. Maybe it's just me and I'm seeing it wrong on my phone, but it says 4-tuck lazy splice. To me, it looks like 7. I don't know if it's on my phone or it's called something different, but when I think of a 4-tuck, I think it's only tucked 4 times. The picture shows like 7 times.
And so in this case, we're calling it a 4-tuck because there's 4 red tucks and four tucks with the red rope and 4 tucks with the white rope.
Okay. All right. I see it now. Have you guys tested 5/16 like spliced together? Because I know when you say you tie it differently, knot it differently, it reduces that strength line by X%. Have you guys actually tried to use like ProFlex line or any type of line, 5/16, 11/32,
Sure.
and tie it in differently and test that? Because not to knock your red line stuff, but these guys are making ropes forever. Obviously, I would think it's a lot better quality than the stuff we're trying to build now. Have you guys tried using stuff that's been out to help to hold up better?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it was actually part of a discussion I had today with the group working on rope from Maine and also National Marine Fisheries Services. There is interest in that. One of the issues is one of the 3 criteria is that all the contrivances have to be identifiable, repeatable, and enforceable. And so one of the issues of just using a standard 5/16 rope and say splicing it is that's a possibility. And you're right. There's a good chance that may break at or below 1,700 pounds. But feedback that we're getting is that we would need to ask the rope manufacturers to put some type of marking within that rope that makes it identifiable. So in this case, the red rope of the candy cane rope is uniquely identifiable. The standard rope you were talking of, 5/16, is not. So if we could get the manufacturers to put some type of a colored tracer in it to uniquely identify that, then those options would be doable. We haven't tested them to date because, standard 5/16 is not uniquely identifiable. And as you know, you can get 5/16 set break at 2,200 pounds, and you can get 5/16 set breaks at close to 3,000 pounds. So it's a matter of identifying specific type.
Okay. Another question is, have you guys thought about knocking down the wreck guys from 10 traps to like 6 or 7? Would that help our case? People who are out there trying to make a living, than people who are just out there not making a living? Would that help our case with the whole percentage? Because you're saying there's what, 20,000 wreck lines out there. If you knock everyone down 30%, well, now you're down to 13, 14,000.
Yeah,
Would that
so
help the commercial side at all, Dan?
well, what I mentioned earlier, even though there's a 10 trap limit, our surveys show that most fishermen don't fish the 10. So, if you brought it down to say 6 or 7 and everybody fished the 6 or 7, you might actually have a slight increase. So we didn't, well, we're not being obliged to come up with comparable reductions in the recreational fishery, but the proposal and the rules that we put in obviously do that between the seasonal closure and the thinner line as a mandate. But I don't think in terms of the overall take reduction plan and the risk reduction that the rec sector is included in those calculations. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. And in fact, under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, it technically doesn't apply to recreational fisheries. And so in this case, the steps we've taken, like having a closed season for our rec fishery, as well as a ban on rope rate and 5/16, were steps that we've taken that are above and beyond what's required by the federal plan. But we, in the interest of equity and also in the interest of really trying to provide right whales with appropriate conservation, we took those steps.
Okay. Yeah, because like, obviously, and I know, wreck guys are not fishing in 120 feet of water. They're fishing in 40, 50 feet of water. And a whale comes in, hooks into one of those. You and I both know the thing's not going to break. Because they're using traps that are 20 pounds. We're using traps that are about 80. It's completely different fishery. So that's just my thought on it, because they don't have to, they can use heavier rope, but obviously it's lower breaking strength, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to break no matter what you do to it. Unless they have to use the 1,700 pounds, maybe, but they allow to use 5/16. It's not changing much, considering it's not going to break anyways because the weight of their gear.
Thank you. We will move on to Jay Fleck. Jay, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Question, going through the presentation, there was, the reference to the word buoy line. And I guess I'm just looking for a definition on buoy line in relations to ground line. And if someone's fishing trawls and say they're using 7/16 Everson, when they're making up their trawl, they might leave 10 fathoms of line before they get to the first trap, and then they go through, and then after the last trap, there's another 10 fathoms, and then they would tie in what they can, what we all consider a normal buoy line. They may go down to 3/8 or something like that. So for the purposes of the calculation, I'm assuming that the buoy line is from the buoy to the trap, and that 10 fathoms of line that, you know, people consider is considered buoy line? Or are you saying now that everything from the buoy to the trap has to be 3/8 and then you could start with 7/16?
Mm. It's a good question. So question for you, do you typically insert a piece of float rope or chafing rope to help get that lower 25% up off the bottom?
To be honest with you, I've been part-time in the industry for a while, so just kind of single. So I'm looking to get back into it. But historically, when I was fishing, like I hadn't. You know, it was just kind of, you know, I'd count out 10 fathoms, get to the first trap, tie in a gudgeon, make my, you know, 20-pot trawl, and then another 10 fathoms, and then get into, you know, adding a 3/8 buoy line or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the purposes of a regulation, and I'd have to talk to our regulations guy about this some more, but I think it would apply to from the buoy to the trap. I don't know how we would necessarily distinguish an extra 10 fathoms of rope that was part of the ground line without some type of, you know, there's nothing to specifically differentiate the two.
So, okay, so I guess you're saying that, so now everything from the buoy, if we're calling that all buoy line, everything from the buoy all the way to the first trap has to be can't be any larger than 3/8?
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, next we'll go to Christopher Houghton. Chris, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hey, you guys got me there?
Yep.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah. I was just kind of confused on like the length. So they're saying 3 feet. So it's like 3 feet after, is that including the splice or the little contrivance there that you have, the little tucks and all that? Is that 3 feet in between the end line, or is that overall, I'm going to cut a 3-foot section of this red rope, and that includes the splice, that includes the tucks, all that. So pretty much in between your now cut end line, you wouldn't either have a lot of line there or you'd have 3 feet.
Yeah, so it would be, you would cut a minimum of a 3-foot piece and then insert it.
Do is what I will.
Yep.
Okay, so, you know, I do moorings as well, and I have a big scale because I build concrete blocks. So I hooked that to my truck, and I've been trying to get a hold of a couple of people on this. I hooked that to my truck, and we tied it one end to that and then one end to another truck and pulled the two trucks apart. I haven't reached 1,400 pounds yet on any of these contrivances. Not just that, but especially on the your so-called 4-tuck system. That red line pulled completely out without even question. I mean, my buddy was backing his truck up. So, I mean, I'd love to know how, you know, how these things even, I mean, have any of you seen any of these things work? Have you ever hauled the trap with these instead of just putting them on pulling machines? Because in my eyes, none of this has worked.
Well, I can tell you that, I mean, based on first, I mean, all these options shown here, it wasn't just like 1 or 2 samples were broken. A minimum of 10 of each of these options was broken. They all broke at around 1,600, between 1,600 and 1,700 pounds. And so that, I mean, the data doesn't lie. That's what it is. Relative to it, has it been fished with? The only option that's been fished with fairly extensively are the sleeves. Those have been, some guys have used those, and we've also tested it for a complete season on our Gear for a Ventless Trap survey. And so we've had success with those. But these options here, these are all new. They're just brand new, just approved now. So they're not, no one's had the opportunity to fish with them yet.
Right. Right. So it's just based off a poundage system that you guys have. It's not based on like a fishing system where, you're hauling, it ain't a great day and you got the boat moving and everything else. They don't have that thought of it as well,
No, it doesn't account for like heave of the boat and extra strain put on, but heavy conditions or hang down, things like that. No, it
right.
It's
Okay.
straight tensile strength.
Okay. And then the other thought, I mean, I was in and out on the meeting, but I don't know if maybe you've already said it, but how come nothing was tried with knots? Like if you were to do like a square knot and then tuck back in, that's essentially the same thing as these loop to loops. If you know what a square knot is, it's pretty much just like an overhand. And it loops back on itself and it creates that non-knot system where if you tuck the ends back in, it's that smooth condition. Because I caught the end of it there where you were saying it's like this continuation, just like a splice would be a continuation. And also what you said, whereas a knot, it drops down your ability to have that same tensile strength. So would an overhand, like a square knot, would that be acceptable and like tucked in?
Into the red weak rope?
Yep.
So it's possible. Again, what I advised the last gentleman who commented on this was to send me a picture of it, and then I can forward it to folks at who are doing the gear testing as well as National Marine Fisheries Service and have them look at it. Just remember that again, you add knots in it, it's going to reduce the breaking strength of the rope even lower, and so that's something to consider. And also, we've made an effort to try to avoid kind of larger profile knots relative to them being more difficult to disentangle whales from. But again, if you send us, send me a picture of what you're proposing, we can have it looked at.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you.
Yep.
Take care.
You too.
Would it actually make sense to have you send you a sample? Like delivered to one of our field stations or something, or drive it down?
We're happy to. We can meet up and grab a sample. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that, and then we can make some up and look at them.
I could drop it at the Gloucester office if you want.
Yep, that's fine. If you drop it at the Gloucester office, we can make sure we get it and take a look at it. Yep.
All right, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, next we have Damian Parkington. Damian, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One may have been answered already. I didn't catch it, but the first one I wanted to ask was the trawl length increased to compensate for any extra ground line that we might use to give less, less weight on the buoy line.
Yep. So I'm sorry.
I'm asking if the allowable trawl length was increased so that we might lengthen the distance between the end traps to lessen the weight on the buoy line.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So I don't think we've addressed that in state waters, Dan, correct? But my understanding is that part of the proposed rule is looking at extending that to accommodate for the trawling up scenarios. But I think that's something we could look into. Is that a fair characterization, Dan?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if the trawl length by regulation is either 24 or 2,500 feet. I don't know, was Jared Silver? So I guess, Damian, what length were you looking for?
It's been circulated now a couple of times in conversation since I've been listening in, but basically whether or not you use an anchor or whether or not you just wanted to extend the distance between your first and second or your second and third trap. Right now, to extend that, like I'm at 2,000 feet, I believe that's the regulation. Maybe it's a little bit more. I remember 2,000, but to extend that, I'd be breaking I don't want to be breaking the law to extend that, you know?
Yeah. No, but that's a good suggestion. We could go to rulemaking and amend that for sure. But that hadn't been brought to our attention prior, especially for this. But your current trawls are up to 3,000 feet.
I think we lost him. Hang on.
Okay.
No, but for everyone else on the call, that's a good suggestion, and it's something we could consider for the next round of rulemaking when we have to do gear marking rulemaking anyways. Maybe we can consider that, Dan. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the Outer Cape guys tend to fish more distance between traps because of the featureless bottom, and so maybe it's more common for the Outer Cape guys who are fishing trawls to have longer trawls than guys on more broken bottom.
Okay, I'm not seeing him anymore, so I'm gonna go to Richard Fisher. Richard, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. My question is in enforcement. There's so many different variants to how this can be put up. When it comes time to enforce this, the game wardens come aboard, they inspect it. Is there going to be fines levied, or are they going to be accustomed to this? Is there going to be some kind of grace period? Because with so many different variants of how you're supposed to tie this and length and width, it's just so much difference, and every warden looks at it differently. What's going to happen in that situation?
So
that's a good question. We obviously will be working with the Office of Law Enforcement, the Mass Environmental Police, and sort of instruct them as to how these contrivances are what's been approved. But what would be logical is, if a warden gets on your boat and you've adopted one of these options, you could just show them, and that way you're both on the same page, because we have 7 or 8 that are approved now. We might have twice that number by the middle or end of the summer. It kind of reminds me of the seafood dealers. They call them HACCP plans, where FDA has some mandates, but every seafood dealer has his own plan. And so you're going to have your own plan of how, it's your favorite way to set up these contrivances. It's up to you. So I'm not sure that it's going to be that confusing for them if you get on the boat and you tell the officer, hey, I'm going with the 3-tuck lazy splice. And here is the picture. So yeah, they're going to have photos of all these contrivances, so they'll know.
Okay, and the other question I have, I believe it was already asked. As far as the breakaways on the buoys, I believe somebody said that was still a federal mandate, so we're still required to use the breakaways also on the buoy?
correct, for this year. Yeah, my understanding is that in the federal rule, they're in the process of finalizing that requirement may be taken away. So for next year, you likely will not have to use those.
Okay, and I got one more question. And so myself, in some place, in the spring of the year, I believe it was asked, but I'm just clarification. I'm fishing in 10, 20 feet of water. I'm still going to be required to have 60 feet of buoy line, but I have to make sure this contraption, sorry, I'm not good with words, has to be free of basically a pile of rope that I have to hold up, because I'm not going to put 60 feet of water, 60 feet of line in 20 feet of water.
So you don't have to have 60 feet of line. You just need to have a minimum of one contrivance and no length of line greater than 60 feet without a contrivance. So if you have a 30-foot buoy line, you can have one contrivance in it. That's it.
Okay,
You don't have to fish extra rope.
Right. That's like I say, where we fish, some in the spring and the fall of the year. I mean, the summer, we're fishing in, 20 feet of water. I don't want 60 feet of buoy line, because all it does is cause havoc for everybody else. That makes, if I've only got 30 feet of buoy line, I've got I've got this. Now, when I go to deep water, I can just add on to it, but I don't have to add another contraption because I don't fish more than 80 feet of water.
Then you'd be all set. Correct.
All right, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, it looks the raised hands have already asked questions, so I'll go to
Hey,
Garrett.
Julia, I see Damien's back if he wants to finish his question.
Oh, yeah, yep. Oh, nope, he just put his hand down. Oh, there he is.
Okay.
Damien, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My phone powered off. My other question was, I understand that knots are being discouraged, but right now are not, it's not a regulatory thing. Can we please get could we get the braking strength of each of these contraptions with an overhand and a becket tied in, so that at least fishermen know going into the season what the reduction in tensile strength is? Because if we're going in and like, oh, all right, well, I can try a becket, I'm gonna, and a becket into a loop actually reduces it by 50 cents. I mean, by 50%, we could start losing gear pretty quick.
Yeah, sure. So to answer your question, again, I need to see it and I need to pass it up to see if it's approved. Right now, these have been not only brake tested, but they've been evaluated relative, NIMS has told us it's consistent with their rules relative to what they plan on going forward. What I'm not sure about is whether or not other types of knots are going to be consistent with their rules. And so I can't approve that at this time. But if folks get me samples or pictures of these things, we will pass them along. And if everyone agrees that they're acceptable, we'll have them strength tested and get the results out to folks as soon as possible.
Roger that. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Bob,
Yes.
isn't it safe to say that if somebody delivered to you 10 replicates of these, you'd be able to get them up to Maine a lot faster than if they gave you a picture or one and we had to tie 9 more because you need replicates of 10?
Yes, but I also just want to be cautious about that because I don't want folks to go through a lot of effort if it's a non-starter in the first place. Like there's the whole repeatable, identifiable, or enforceable thing. It's got to pass those metrics, and I want folks up the chain and NIMS to take a look at it first and say, yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's test it before I start taking samples because I don't want to make promises I can't keep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll go to Garrett. Garrett, you can unmute yourself.
You guys hear me again?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
So Bob told that man earlier that asked about tying in his South Shore sleeves, it was fine. As fishermen, as long as we have that red rope, it really shouldn't matter how we tie it in. And then he said they shy away from knots, but told that man it's okay to tie his sleeves in. When here we are with these 4 piss poor options. I mean, nobody's going to be doing number 3. I did 20 of those loops the other night, kind of split between the evening and the morning. My hands felt like they were going to fall off. And that's coming off of building 200 traps this winter. So they're kind of seasoned. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. Why can't we use our own discretion? We don't care about what you guys are testing as knots. All we care is we have the 1,700 pound rope, which probably should have been produced through Seaside or.
All right, so let me respond. So I think one thing that everyone needs to understand is that it's critically important that we make this work because the alternative is terrible. The alternative here is that we lose our authority to issue and allow folks to fish buoy lines in Massachusetts state waters. And so this is an option for us to comply with a federal mandate from a federal judge to reduce risk and receive an incidental take permit. If we're not successful with this, the alternative is no buoy lines, which pushes us in a pathway towards ropeless fishing, which I think we can all agree at this point isn't ready for prime time and would have serious consequences for the industry. And so the options presented here are options that we've put together with materials available for us that meet all the criteria that we're going to have to abide by relative to the federal plan, and achieve that in a fairly short order, and we're working to get this out in folks' hands. And so, like, I understand the frustration, and I understand that this rope isn't as seasoned and tested as all the commercially available rope. We understand that, but our hand is forced on this, and we're doing everything that we can to get stuff and options in your hands so you guys can all continue to fish in a manner that's similar to what you're doing right now. And that's our goal. And we're trying to do so in as quick a time period and as little cost. These options have all been vetted and approved and brake tested. These are what are approved right now. We're willing to work with folks if they have other specific options that they would like to have vetted and tested and approved. We're willing to do that. But I'm pleading with you on this. That, as a whole, the industry needs to adopt this and make this work, because the alternative is not a good one.
I don't really see how. I mean, when you have the red rope there, the red rope's there, whether you need it once or twice, whether you need one sleeve or two sleeves. I mean, all of us as fishermen understand about knots and which knots are good and which knots are bad. We all use a Beckett to a loop, like in the picture in number 3. I don't see how it's any different.
Well, Bob, and Garrett, I think what Bob's trying to point out is that by using some of these configurations, you maintain braking strength. And you told us earlier that you were concerned about the need for sufficient braking strength. And but by using these splices, I think you maintain the higher level of braking strength. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. These options here are very efficient. They break very close to the original braking strength of the material.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Who's next?
Next, we have John Todd. He's rejoining as a panelist.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. A couple of things on Garrett and what Garrett was saying. I think what Garrett was driving it, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think what he's trying to get at is, and it's a question for a lot of us, I guess, is we understand the different ways, and that's fine, and everything's scientifically tested, and you've got solid data on it, and that's great. But I think what he's getting at is, if the line, say the red line, is designed to break at 1,700 pounds, I think the question is what difference does it make how it's attached to the line? I mean, if the red line is designed to break it at 1,700, I think that's the question is why isn't the line breaking at 1,700? I mean, where in the test, where was it failing? Was it failing at the splice or at the eyes, or where the tucks were, or was it breaking in the middle of the line somewhere? Because I guess that's the question is, if the line's designed to break at 1,700, then what's the matter of how it's attached to the regular buoy line if that line is supposed to break? I think that's the question is, I guess.
No, I understand that, and so first understand that DMF, this isn't criteria that we're coming up with unilaterally. We're having to comply with rules that are going to be put in place for the entire lobster industry from basically New York up to Maine, and so the final rules relative to how these options are put into place are not completely finalized. But our understanding is that they're identifiable, enforceable, and repeatable. And there are also considerations relative to the complexity of the gear and how it may interact with a whale in the event of an entanglement. And so we're largely rely on a lot of the feedback from folks at National Marine Fisheries Service relative to what's going to be approved. And so I can't right now, if you give you approval for any specific option that involves other knots or other connection types than what we've shown here tonight. However, I'm more than willing to, if you have additional ideas that you would like to see tested, I am more than willing to work with you to get those tested and go through the approval process.
Yes, and I think that's awesome. And I'm sure, like you said, a lot of these things were ideas that Lobster had brought to you for testing. And obviously you're probably going to end up with a slew of them now because other guys are going to come up with other ideas that haven't been tested yet. But I guess that answers the question. It's just obviously because it has to be a consistent, reliable thing that's tested. But I just guess that's the big question mark as well. Okay, if the line's supposed to break at 1,700 pounds, then, is the line breaking at 1,700 pounds? So,
I get it. No, I get it. No, and I understand your frustration. But
I'm not even frustrated. It doesn't matter to me as long as it's going to work and it's not going to fail prematurely where it's not supposed to. As long as that's good, I'm okay with whatever way I'm going to do it, which I haven't decided yet. But I think that's just a lot of guys' question is, well, what does it matter? But I get what you're saying too.
Yeah, no, understood. And you actually brought up another good point. So none of the options here were developed by a DMF biologist or anybody at DMF. These are every single option tested were options that commercial fishermen contacted us with and said, hey, here's a way that I like to attach rope. Can you have this tested? Is this something we can do? And that's what we did. So we'll continue to do that. But yeah, so these options, in our opinion, work pretty well as far as breaking strength, and they were suggested by fishermen. So we're hopeful.
Okay, and then I just have one other thing. When you were speaking to Jay Fleck, and he was asking about the buoy line length versus adding, the section that was on the bottom of the end of your ground line. So I guess that brought up a question for me. It's not just. He was bringing up the diameter of the rope, 3/8 buoy line versus whatever you have for your ground line. Now, I use 3/8, so I'm not worried about that myself, but I know a lot of guys use much thicker line for the ground line. So if you've got a, 10 pot trawl, 20 pot trawl, whatever the case may be. So as far as the diameter, so now you're basically saying that you're going to have your ends from your pot to the end of your trawl line, be it 2, 3, 10, whatever, however many fathom you have on the end, will have to still be 3/8. And then the rest of your ground line can be whatever it is.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we would have no way otherwise to distinguish buoy line from ground line. So.
Right. I know, like I myself, my ground lines are separate from my buoy lines. I have a becket on the end of my ground lines and I tie my buoy line to it. But a lot of guys don't. A lot of guys, it's all one continuous line, So I get that would be hard to determine the differentiation between the two. But therein lies the other question is when it comes to considering the length of your buoy line for contrivances, I usually have about 2 fathoms just, between my trap and the end of my becket at the end of my ground line. So are you going to be adding in the total length of your buoy line then? Is that 2 fathoms of that piece of ground line to that trap will be added to the length of the overall length of the buoy line then in trying to figure out how many you need?
I'm not sure if I understand the exact convention that you're talking about, but essentially, we need to, the way the rule's written is that the buoy line can't be greater than 3/8 inch. So that buoy line needs to be distinguished from the ground line. That exact connection, I'm not sure, but typically, a lot of our understanding is a lot of guys use, the first 25% can be some type of chafing gear, can be floating rope to kind of get it up off the bottom. Usually, I would say wherever that chafing rope starts would be a good indicator where the break between the ground line and the buoy line is. And then the contrivance rule starts at the top 75% of the buoy line. Doesn't include that bottom 25%.
I understand that, but then I'm kind of confused because we'll say, like, we'll go back to my regular buoy line is 12 fathoms. So we'll just say 70 feet. Now, if you were to consider that extra 2 fathoms, now you're another 24 feet of line added to my overall length of my buoy line. If you did that, but see, my confusion is if you're going to consider the width of the line, in J Flex example, if you're going to be taking that extra length of line on the ground line to the trap from what would have been the end of your ground line, as considering that part of the length of the buoy line, as far as the width of the line, if you're going to consider that part of the buoy line for that, wouldn't it also be considered as part of the buoy line length as far as contrivances? And in which case you're adding whatever length you have at the end of your ground line to the trap. If you have a separate buoy line, you know what I'm saying?
I do, and so my advice to everybody on this would be, it's from an enforcement standpoint and a conservation standpoint, you're better off accounting for that extra length and marking, and as well as putting contrivances in to comply with the rule, instead of going with a lesser amount of marking and or contrivances. I don't think you want to get into a debate with, well, that's ground line versus this is buoy line. If it's coming up from the last trap on, you should probably consider it as buoy line.
Okay. All right. I guess that's all my questions for right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to Lobster Guy.
Question on picture number 3. Does it matter if you splice your regular buoy line and Eye Splice the red line for easiness of changing out when needed? Or is that how it's tested and that's how it's gonna have to be?
It's a great question. And another fisherman had already brought that to our attention, and the samples of that, what you just mentioned, rigging it kind of the opposite of the way it's pictured here.
Because you have the buoy line, which is permanent. So
correct. Yeah, it's gonna be what you just suggested is going to be tested as well, and I anticipate it'll be fine, and we'll add that to the list.
And when you do that, could you supply information on where it broke? Because I've heard this red line is slippery and it likes to pull out. If that red line pulls out before the 1700, that's a situation. Because if you're lazy splicing the red line and it pulls, then that obviously isn't going to be a good option for us.
Sure. Yep. I can try to get feedback from the folks running the braking test about where and how it breaks, and possibly maybe see if they can even get video of it.
Yeah. And then another math question, unless you're at the end, you can come back on it. So if I were to use red rope on the top part of my buoy line, which is 90 feet, how much red rope do I have to use before going into my regular rope? Like red rope directly to my regular rope. Would I have to need in order to get away from having my regular rope, red rope, back to regular rope?
Sure. So in a 90-foot buoy line, if you're using, you'd have to have a minimum of 3 feet of red rope to comply with the rule.
3 feet?
Yes, it'd be one 3-foot piece.
Okay, so I
Or
can
in
put
this case, if you want to attach, say, 40 feet of weak rope at the top, that's fine.
okay, so are you saying 3 feet at the top or 40 feet at the top? I got 2 inches, sorry.
No, I'm saying as long as that 90-foot section of rope has a minimum of one 3-foot piece of weak rope, you've complied with the rule.
Okay, so I can just put that red rope, attach the red rope directly to my buoy, 3 feet long, and then splice in my regular buoy line and
Well,
send it down to the trap.
Yeah, but you can't have any length of rope greater than 60 feet without a weak contrivance. So
All right, so
if it's more, if from where that red contrivance ends to your trap, that's greater than 60 feet, you wouldn't comply. So you would need to put it down farther in that scenario. You need to put it like 30 feet down, exact 31 feet down, exactly. Yep.
Okay. And then what company is building this red rope from India, or the 1,700-pound stuff from India that you have not received? Do you know you able to give that information out?
I will text someone right now and try to find out while we're on the phone, and I'll announce it before webinar is over.
Yeah, because there's a lot of rope companies out there. I'm just curious which company is coming up with the 1,700.
I just got a text. It's Ship Again.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Next we have Sean Leach. Yep.
Okay. Just a quick question. These are probably going to float down to the federal level at some point as well. We're just going to try to sample this. I just want to kind of understand, if I'm fishing 300-foot buoy lines, I just kind of want to know where I would put the contrivances just for down the road, and I kind of want to try it this season before.
Sure. So where you would have to put them isn't specified. What's specified is in the top 75% of that 300 feet, no length greater than 60 feet can be without an insert.
Okay, so all right, so basically go from the top down and go every 60 feet until you hit the 25%, which is your float line, I guess you would call it.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, all right. And then one other thing, so when we insert these red ropes, no less than 3 feet, so you count those in the length of the rope, right? Or the length of the buoy line?
Yeah, they would add a few feet to your buoy line, sure. Yep.
So just add that in.
Yep.
So when you're getting, just to get a rough idea of, what we're going to be doing. So, all right, that's all right now. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, next we have Tyler Daly. Tyler, you can unmute yourself. Tyler Daly. Okay, we will come back. I have John Simons. John, you can unmute yourself.
All right, 2 questions. What email address should I send these pictures to you on that question I had earlier about the Eye Splice?
Send them to justin.wilson@mass.gov. Justin is our new gear guy, and I will work directly with Justin to distribute those, develop them, and have them tested if appropriate.
All right, so justin.wilson at what?
At mass.gov. So I have it up on the screen right now, if you can see.
Okay, yeah, I got that. All right, and then my other question is, and I think this is what everyone's missing. If you put red rope in your buoy line anywheres, you can't have more than 60 feet of regular rope until you get to your next red rope. So the length of the red rope doesn't really matter. Is that correct?
That's correct. You can't have any length of rope greater than 60 feet without an insert, a weak insert.
All right. So if you've got a 50-foot piece of red rope, you can have 50 feet on top of it and 50 feet on the bottom of it, and that would be good. So you'd have 150 foot total, in the middle of it's 50 foot.
So if you have 150 feet total, you take the top 75% and you measure out, and you can't have any length greater than 60 feet that doesn't have a weak piece of rope in it. So
right.
that's pushing the capabilities. I'm doing math in my head right now. So, but
all right. So to simplify, you've got to have either a piece of, so the measurement starts at the end of the red rope or the end of the South Shore sleeve.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
That's all I need to know. All right.
Yep. Gotcha.
All right. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll try Tyler Daly again. Tyler, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, working this time?
Yep.
Yep, we hear you.
Yeah, with regard to putting in a 3-foot section of the red rope, is that you can just cut a 3-foot section and splice it in, tuck it in, whichever way you want?
Yep, it can be longer than 3 feet. It just can't be shorter than 3 feet. And then you can
the red rope itself,
Yep.
like, but if when you is the gap, does that matter between, say, splice to splice, tuck to tuck?
Nope. It's just the starting length of the piece of gear is 3 feet.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go to
We should
Eric.
probably wrap it up. I think Eric had a question that was not necessarily gear related, and we should try to wrap it up pretty soon. But go ahead, Eric.
Yeah.
Hi, my question is to the pop-up buoys. Do you believe the biggest hurdle for that is going to be the affordability of the buoy?
I think that's definitely one of them. Currently, the gear, pop-up buoy gear, even without the ability to detect it, is somewhere in the order of about $4,500 for the interrogation unit on the boat, and then $3,000 to $4,000 per pop-up buoy. So cost is certainly going to be a hurdle. One of the big issues that I think that folks haven't really started to tackle with is kind of interactions with mobile gear and how mobile gear vessels are going to detect that. So I think that's another major obstacle that the technology needs to overcome, and something that they'll need to work on moving forward.
I believe in my lifetime they're going to cover that hurdle, but my concern is when they cover all these user group hurdles, is what is the price that they're going to say is affordable? Like nymphs, for instance, they'll come a day where they're like, all right, everybody knows where your gear is. Law enforcement can now find your gear and haul it up, and other lobstermen aren't going to set over you. But my issue is, at that time, if the price tag is too high, it's just going to put people out of business with the pressure on nymphs from environmental groups to use this technology.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Eric. I think it's a really important point, and one that is of great concern. It's certainly, there's hope that the cost comes down over time, but it would have to come down fairly substantially to be something that rank and file fishermen would be able to use readily. So, you have very valid concerns.
Okay, that's all I got. We can all go home now.
Thank you. Although I am home.
Two more. Let's take two more questions and wrap it up. John?
He's rejoining as a panelist.
Okay.
Yep. How you doing? Yeah, I just had two things regarding other things. So Bob, you had mentioned so when the closure, the dynamic portion of it from May 1st to May 15th, when there's no right whales left, or when there's no whales left, you can open it up. Now, is that an absolute zero right whales, no right whales at all, or
No.
is it 3 or less?
Yeah, we're looking at 3, and then we're looking at for example, if we found 3 localized to a particular area, we may just keep that particular area with some boundary around it closed and open up the rest. Typically what we see in the right whale season is we have a ton of whales, and then within about a 3-day period, they all leave. And if they continue to do that, that would be great because it makes it a lot easier to manage. But yeah, our metric is 3.
Yeah,
we're looking for 3.
yeah, we just have to give the whales our schedule, and then they'll be all set.
That would be great.
Yeah. And I guess the other one probably is more for Dan. I know during the regulatory stage where you guys were doing the proposal and everybody was doing the Zoom meeting and making comments, somebody had asked you about if you were open to, in the future, some kind of change, or probably not so much getting rid of the closure necessarily, but obviously that, if that's an option, but more just adapting the closure, changing it based on what the whales are doing, the activity, the distribution. It'd be really nice if eventually they can find a way to do long-term tagging of them somehow, that we could get better data on where these whales really are all the time, versus having to do spotters. But is that something that's still open to a possibility, especially if we can more document better that Massachusetts lobster gear isn't really the problem as much as it is other places, which I know is kind of the hope to differentiate ourselves from other places. Is there still a chance of having closure rolled back or changed, or?
Well, I think the answer to that is it has to do with the change of right whale behaviors. And, when we started this in the 90s, I think the biggest, flight we ever had was in the first few years was like a 44 count. And now we're looking at hundreds. So there's something going on in our local waters over time that these whales are attracted to in larger numbers on a seasonal basis. I can't forecast, if that's going to continue. It may not, but if you look at the last few years as sort of a trend, I wouldn't expect it to change in the next few years. But I think any management system has to be, flexible and adaptable. If you look at even the occurrences of right whales in the Bay of Fundy during the summer, they're no longer there in the numbers they used to be. So if there was a Bay of Fundy closure, then the Canadians would probably be looking at lifting that at this point. So yeah, we'll react accordingly, in the future if whales are changing, and to be flexible with the changes of behavior. And who knows where the Ropeless goes, but for now, I think it's a safe bet that given the recent behaviors over the last 5 or 10 years, and the fact that we have 87 here yesterday, that I think it's here for the medium term. But we're, if things change, we have pretty good surveillance, and we'll be responsible and try to amend the rules accordingly.
Okay.
That's
great.
I just add to that, Dan, is not only can we, but we'll have to. So part of the incidental take permit is they issue it for a 3-year period, and it's subject to constant review every 3 years. And so part of that would be if there's any changes in distribution of whales, would be us having to account for that. So that would include, if they move into areas that aren't currently closed, we would have to address that. But also if they vacate areas, we could possibly open up that. And so it's data driven. And obviously that, we would, as Dan said, we would, use the most recent data, sightings trends over time, and try to make informed decisions and adjust those as necessary.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, because I know that their distribution has changed a lot over the years with the copepods moving offshore a little more, and they're trying to follow them. And obviously the Gulf of St. Lawrence has become a hotbed of activity, and unfortunately a lot of strikes. So yeah, so that's great. It's nice to know that you're at least looking at it with a dynamic eye in the future. So that's good.
Yeah. Okay, how about the last comment from Lobster Guy? Lobster Guy, have a name?
Lobster guy, you can unmute yourself, and if you could give us a name, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's Jeff Richardson.
Okay, hey Jeff, thanks.
The ropeless stuff, has there been talk on it about dealing with singles? Because if a guy fishes 400 singles and you're talking $4,500 a pop-up, the guy's going to spend $1.8 million on it.
Yeah,
Maybe
you know,
the trawl guy with the
yeah, I
400,000.
take your point. That's exactly the kind of conclusion that we're hoping that the study that we've been tasked to do. You know, I think it's a fair prediction that single trap fishing could really be economically, extinct if it costs that much. So I take your point, and you know what? If you'd like, you could volunteer to be among those interviewed by the contractor, Noah Oppenheim. So I'd welcome you to lend him your opinions on some of those questions. But
Yeah.
I don't really want to spend too much time on it tonight, because tonight was really about trying to give fishermen the practical information, and what you're talking about is it's a scary future. I hear you on that, and
Or even trawl guys, it's $400,000.
yeah, no, we understand that, and that's why the National Marine Fisheries Service is doing a very deliberate, go slow on this ropeless fishing. Like I said, even if they enact the rules as they've proposed, each of those permit holders is going to have to get an exempted fisheries permit. Again, it's going to be slow and deliberate. That I'm sure.
All right, that's what I wanted to point out. You're good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, folks, really want to thank you for attending tonight. Great attendance, great questions. Bob, great job in doing your best at math and some of these complex calculations. I would urge anybody to give us more feedback to that email address. The reason we created a unique email address, this Conservation Solutions, is we can have a team all opening that email account, as opposed to you emailing one person, and if that person is away or if that person is out on the road giving out rope, they're not going to be able to check it. So that's why we created a single email address that many staffers could all team up to get you the answers that you need. So send us some more comments and questions, and we'd be happy to address them. Bob, any final thoughts?
No, I appreciate everybody's patience with this. We understand that this is difficult, and certainly there's a lot of uncertainty moving forward, and we'll continue to work with you guys as best we can, and again, feel free to reach out and contact us if you have an idea. We're happy to work with you.
Right.
And with that, I'll end the recording.
And thank you, Julia, for all your efforts managing the meeting.